Hey, it's Mike from BlindsOnline.com, and I'm here today to show you how to measure for 9/16 single cellular shade, also known as a honeycomb shade. I'm going to show you how to measure for both an inside mount and outside mount. They're slightly different, so here we go. If you have enough window depth, meaning that if the window is at least 1 inch deep, we can accommodate the shade as an inside mount, meaning the shade will actually mount inside the window frame. Okay, so in order to measure for a shade of that type, the first thing we're going to ask is that you supply us with the width measurement, and that's the width measurement of the inside of the window frame. Okay, so we'd like you to supply us with 3 measurements, and then actually we do want one final measurement, but we'd like you to take 3 measurements. The first measurement being of the top of the window frame. Okay, so we're going to ask for the inside measurement of the top. In this case we have 23 1/8. Then we'd like you to measure the center of the window, and we're coming up with about the same thing here, 23 1/8. And then last but not least, we'd like you to measure the bottom of the window. And here we're coming up with a 23. So you can see that not all windows are perfectly square, and that's the reason why we ask for the 3 measurements. Now, of those 3 measurements, we'd like you to supply us with the smallest of those 3 measurements. In this case, that would be the 23 inches. So we have our width determined at 23 inches for this particular window. The next thing we're going to ask from you is the height measurement. The height measurement, again, we'd also like you to take that measurement in 3 places. We'd like you to measure from the far left of the window, okay, to where you'd like the window shade to hang. In this case, it would be the bottom sill, which is around 35 3/4, okay. Then we'd like to measure the center of the window, again, and we're just making sure that everything's kind of square here so that when the shade comes down, it lands where you want it to land and it's not short. We're coming up with 35 3/4, and last but not least, we want the far right, and we're coming up with about 35 5/8. So we have our 3 measurements in length. We'd like you to supply us with the longest of those 3 measurements for this particular type of shade. So that would be your 35 3/4 length. So if you're going to mount your shade inside, we're going to ask you to supply us with those exact measurements, and Blinds Online will know to make a slight deduction from that width so that when you mount the shade inside the frame, it fits just right and it's not rubbing on the side of the window frame. Okay, so we'll make a slight deduction from the width that you supply us if you order the shade as an inside mount. Okay, now if you don't have the depth, or if by some other idea, or if you'd like to mount the shade on the outside of the window frame as opposed to inside for whatever reason, okay, and the main reason would be that you don't have enough window depth to accommodate the shade inside, then there are 2 ways you can mount the shade. You can either mount the shade directly to the molding on top, or you can mount the shade just above the molding on top. All right, let's take a measurement first for the width on an outside mount. Outside mount width for this type of 9/16 cellular shade would be from the far left of the molding edge, to the far right. In this case, we're looking at about 27 7/8. And here we don't really need the 3 measurements. It's not as critical because the shade's going to be sitting outside the frame. There's nothing for the shade to rub on. So the 27 7/8 would be a good measurement. That means that the shade's going to go from the far left of the molding to the far right of the molding. Okay, so we have our width measurement, 27 7/8. Height, we have a couple of options. Height, let's start with the top of the molding to where we want the shade to hang. And in this case, if we were to mount the shade right to the molding, right to the trim, then we want the shade to hang to the bottom of the bottom molding, which in this case is about 40 1/2 inches. That's it. We're done. Our measurement's going to be 40 1/2 inches for the height. All right, which means the top rail would get mounted to the top of the molding, and your shade would finish right at the bottom of the bottom molding. Now, if you prefer not to mount to the molding, you can always mount just above the molding as well. Okay, if you're going to mount just above the molding, then we suggest you add an additional 1 inch for the height, which will accommodate the height of the bracket that must be mounted above the trim. Okay, and we'll show you how to mount that bracket in our installation video, but for now we'd just like to show you how to supply us with the correct measurements. So if it's outside mount, we want the exact molding to molding width. We want the height from where you're going to be mounting the shade, in this case either from the top of the molding to where the shade will hang, or we'll add that additional inch if we're going to be mounting outside the window frame. Okay, and that's basically how we measure for the 9/16 inch single cell shade from blindsonline.com. Again, I'm Mike from blindsonline.com, and if you do have any questions, feel free to call. I'm always here to answer your questions. Thanks.